Cute little buggers. Well, I've never had a chance to see them in person. That's what I think when I see a picture of a quokka. Have you ever heard of them? If not, more than likely, if you look up their picture, you've seen them too, with this big, big smile on their face. In today's episode, Dr. Matt Hayward, he joins me. Matt's a professor at the University of Newcastle. He's the author of the book, Saving Biodiversity, and he's a leading expert in everything quokka. These cute little guys are marsupials, and like all marsupials, they carry their babies, called joeys, in a pouch. Now, they only have one joey at a time. Now, if you know anything about them, you probably heard or read about this. When they're being chased by a predator, they let their predator have their joey to escape them so they can survive. Now, that sounds brutal. Well, it's sort of true, but it's not exactly what happens. We debunked this. And believe me, it's not as bad as it sounds. There's a lot of science behind this, and it is fascinating. Crazy, but fascinating. Now, in the mid-2010s, they were labeled the world's happiest animal. Now, for you selfie lovers out there, there's actually a term called Quokka selfie. Now, that's all because Roger Federer took a selfie with a quokka. And guess what? It went viral. And it's involved to today's term, again, Quokka selfie. Now, get this one. Quokkas are really, really very friendly, and they've been known to walk into pubs and just hang out with the crowd. Seriously. Now, think about it. Hey, little guy, would you like a pint of beer? Anyways, so while they're not the groundhog in the movie Caddyshack, these little guys are just as memorable. And I can't wait for you to hear Matt introduce you to these cute and now called the happiest animal in the world.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange, losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real podcast. Today, my guest is from Down Under, and I got a question for that. My guest is from Down Under, Matt Hayward, but we are going to talk about the happiest animals in the world, Quokkas, today, and a lot of other things. So anyways, Matt, thanks for joining the show. I know it's morning for you, night for me, but I'm really glad to have you on, and really, I know we're going to have fun.
Great to be here, Mark.
So here's my question. I was thinking about this today, too, because I was going to say Down Under. Do you guys say up over when you talk about it?
No, we don't. We like the Down Under bit.
Yeah.
Ever since the song came out, we're pretty keen on that.
Yeah, I bet. Anyways, so I digress. Hey, so anyways, Matt, and like for everybody listening, we are going to talk about the happiest animal in the world. At least that's what they're labeled since 2010. But let's talk a little bit about you first. I know you've got a book coming out. I'm going to save that to the end, but let's talk about how you got where you are today, and then we'll get into the Quokkas and probably go all kinds of places for all the different stuff you've done. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I guess I always had an interest in animals and wildlife. My mum was pretty concerned that I couldn't read when as a little kid, I'd go to the library and borrow books with lots of pictures of animals. And then all of a sudden I started recounting facts about these animals, and her concerns were allayed a bit. But I went out, I played a bit of sport as a kid, so I was pretty keen on trying to play cricket for Australia until I worked out that I had to train too many hours of the day to be able to achieve that goal. So I kind of moved across and remembered my interest in wildlife and did a science degree at university, and then did a PhD on the quokka, and that's kind of where I developed my interest in quokkas. But after that, I went over to Africa for a few years and went to Poland for a couple of years and the UK, and worked fairly extensively back in Australia here.
Oh, I was mentioning earlier when we were talking before we came on, I actually spent some time in Krakow on my way into Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's a great city. I like Poland.
Oh, it's a beautiful city, isn't it? And there's some really nice wild places nearby.
Yeah.
Not up in the mountains, the Carpathians are great, but just further in there, there's some beautiful caves with some nice bats in there as well.
Of course, nice bats. You're one of those people. Anyway, hey, by the way, cricket's a great sport. I like that fact that instead of, we have the seventh inning stretch, you guys have the tea and crumpet time.
That's right.
I know. I think it's the best thing ever. Okay, it's time to go get some tea and crumpets.
Except I played for a university cricket club where the tea was provided by the university students, so it was always pretty cheap and nasty.
Oh yeah, well, I'm sure afterwards I know what you guys were doing. You're Australian, so I know exactly what you were doing. Anyways, I digress. So, anyways, you started with Quokkas and you did all that stuff. When you decided to do the Quokkas, and for the people that are listening, I guarantee when you find them, you're going to fall in love with them for a very obvious reason. How did you pick them, or did the school pick it for you, or how did that work?
Oh, I'd left university. I did like an extra year of research at the end of my undergraduate degree. And my supervisor was an American guy who used to wear big snakeskin boots and a Stetson hat and walk along the corridors of the university whistling "God Save the Queen."
That wasn't Crocodile Dundee, was it?
No. He was a great guy. But I was initially going to work on ringtail possums,
Sure.
How they were affected by fires. But then a fire went through the area and killed all the ringtail possums. And so I kind of went off and we had this awkward conversation. He said, "Oh, look, you can't do that project, but, we'll think about something else. Are you interested in doing a PhD?" So I kind of looked at him and we looked awkwardly at each other for 30 seconds, I reckon. And then I kind of walked out. I didn't hear from him again for 4 years. And then he rang me up and I was in a hotel in the middle of nowhere in Australia. And he asked me if I wanted to do a PhD still. And so I said yes. He flew me across the country to Western Australia and I met the people over there and sussed out what the project was going to be, and I jumped at the chance.
Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, I for everybody listening, you've done so much. I do want to get in. You're a professor, so I want to talk about that because your conservation side of your bio is really fascinating, and I do want to get into that. I want to stay on Quokkas, but like I said earlier, there's just so many ways I could go. Like I told you when we talked the first time,
Yeah.
I start going down all these stupid holes, but they're not stupid, but they're really interesting. Me, they're stupid, but the rest of the people, it's not. I don't know. So let's go to the Quokkas first. So you fly over. Tell everybody that's listening where they are, because they're in a limited area for the most part, unless they're in a sanctuary. So where are they?
Yeah, so Quokkas are restricted to the southwest corner of Western Australia. And they were the second species discovered by Europeans when they came along to Australia. Obviously, the indigenous people, the Noongar people in the southwest, had known about them for millennia.
Right.
But Willem de Vlamingh and Samuel Volkerson were Dutch explorers or trying to reach the Dutch East Indies. And they bumped into Australia on the way across. And they hit Rottnest Island, which is Dutch for Rat Nest Island. And they saw this large animal and they thought, they described it as a rat about as big as a common cat.
Right.
And it's neither. And so Rottnest Island is kind of synonymous off the coast of Perth in Western Australia. It's synonymous with the quokka, but it also occurs on Bald Island down to the south and throughout the mainland. But very few people know they exist on the mainland. And that's where I did all my work.
And for the people that are here in the U.S., that's Bald Island, not Bold Island, just so you know.
Yeah, sorry about my dodgy accent.
Yeah, I did a little bit of reading, but Bald would be, look at a picture of me and you'll know. Anyways, yeah, that's cool. And what's funny when I was reading that, but the indigenous people are I'm trying to remember, Nangor, is that the right name? Noongar. And the word they used for it meant like cat or wild cat or feral cat or something. Is that true?
Oh, I didn't know that. It's certainly the book is a Noongar word, yeah.
Yeah, because I think I'm just finding my notes. So it was like GWADE, I think, if I could only read my writing. And I think it was like Guada or something, and it meant wild cat.
Yeah, I don't know whether it would have been wild cat because there were no cats on Australia at that time. So it might have been like chudich is equivalent to a wild cat. It's a quoll, a marsupial predator, about maybe a small cat size. But yeah, I think it's completely different.
You know what? You know what it probably was? It was the internet telling its usual lies that it normally tells you. I'm reading and going, oh, well, that sounds good to me. Anyway, so let's talk about these guys. And again, for you guys that are listening and don't know them, when you find them, they're just adorable. But let's talk about, before we get into their smile and all that kind of stuff, let's talk about how big they are, all the specifics, so we can really kind of tell people about what the animal's like.
So they're about 4 to 5 kilograms. They're a grey, fluffy, just a small kangaroo. But in that weight range, virtually every Australian mammal has declined since the arrival of foxes and cats. And so we call that the critical weight range.
Uh-huh.
Anything between 35 grams and 5.5 kilograms has really been smashed by foxes and cats. And so they're within the group of species that just gets, well, is largely threatened because of these invasive predators. And so if we're unable to kind of manage these introduced predators, we risk losing a whole heap of Australian native species. And so the southwest of WA is really rich in some of these endangered species because there's a group of plants called the gastrolobium plants, which are beautiful, have beautiful flowers, but they also contain a poison, sodium monofluoroacetate, which is also known as 1080. And the placental predators that have recently moved into Australia cannot cope with that poison, whereas the native species can. So a brush-tailed possum, which eats a bit of meat as well, is able to eat about 35 meat baits filled with 1080, whereas one meat bait would kill a fox or a cat. So there's really high tolerance within them. And so that might be a reason why quokkas and a whole range of other species were able to survive in that southwestern corner. But they're herbivores. They're kind of browsing species, so they eat the leaves of trees and small shrubs, mostly small shrubs, and have a pretty small home range, about 6 hectares, and they're restricted to, on the mainland, to densely vegetated swamps. And that may well be just an artifact of them avoiding foxes and cats,
right? Because
the foxes and cats aren't as effective predators in that dense vegetation. Whereas on the islands, they're in a very different habitat, and their whole ecology is really different on the islands. They're much more easily seen by people. They have a different diet. They reproduce seasonally on the islands, but on the mainland, they reproduce throughout the year. So they're quite a different kind of ecological conditions that they have to cope with on the islands compared to the mainland.
You know, one of the things I read, I think that it's the plant you're talking about. It was a big name, so I didn't remember it. But anyways, I guess they're really prickly too, so they can get underneath those things and sleep and not be disturbed by humans or anything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And on the mainland, they make these runways. So one of the ways we survey them is to walk into these really thick vegetation, and you kind of have to lean into it to push a gap through the vegetation and push down the vegetation so you can keep walking in. But when you look down around your feet, there's these little knee-high runways that quokkas make as they push their way through the vegetation. So they're not restricted by food at all. There's plenty of food for them there. It's just their way of avoiding the predators.
Yeah, and again, their food is they're herbivores, so it's all plants and things like that.
Yeah, that's right.
So I want to. I apologize. I should apologize at the beginning. I'm going to bounce all over the place, but it's just how my brain works. I'm sorry. My poor kids are just going, That's my dad. I'm so embarrassed. Anyways, so let's talk about, because I know they're in the marcopod, or is it macropod?
Macropod, yep.
Talk about what a macropod is, because I know they're related to, the wallabies and kangaroos and whatever else are in that grouping. Can you talk a little bit about that? So I just want people to fully understand who they are.
Yeah, that's right. So macropod means big foot. So macro, big,
cool.
Pod, foot. So they're the big-footed wallabies, marsupials, and all the wallabies and kangaroos fit into that family, Macropodidae. And they're their own genus. So the scientific name is Cetonix brachyurus, and there's no other members of the genus Cetonix. People think that the closest relatives are the padymelons, the thylogale from the east coast, and when Australia was much wetter, there would have been continuous forest vegetation around the coastal zone, and that might have enabled the populations to connect. And since those two have separated, the quokka's gone on its own way and evolved into a completely separate genus. But now there's certainly no connection at all between any macropod, similar type of macropod over the east. There's 54 different species of macropod roughly in Australia. So we've got the big red kangaroos that are, and the big four are really common, but it's all the small wallabies or macropods that are really threatened by foxes and cats.
Yeah, well, and by the way, when you say cats, it's domestic cats, not wild cats, domestic cats, right?
Yeah, that's right. So Australia has no native cats or foxes or placental animals. Dingo is now considered native. That's a kind of small wolf-like dog.
Right.
But it was brought in by Indonesian fishermen 5,000 years ago or so. But the native species recognise it as a threat, and so that's why we consider it now a native species.
So, marsupial being an animal that has a pouch, but I know that, like I mentioned to you, I did that one episode with Tasmanian devils, which are marsupials, but they're not macropods because they don't have big feet, right?
No, that's right. So yeah, the higher order above the family, we're talking um, the marsupials. So it's the mammals are broken into three distinct types of subgroups, I guess.
Uh-huh.
We've got the placentals like humans and cats and dogs. We've got the marsupials like kangaroos, wallabies, and Tasmanian devils, and we've got the monotremes like echidnas and platypus. And Australia's kind of home. Well, there's marsupials outside Australia, and you guys get them.
Mhm.
The opossum, I guess, up in North America, but South America's got a few
Awesome. Yeah.
as well. But Australia's got lots, and Papua New Guinea's got lots too. But we've got very few placentals apart from our rodents and our bats.
Right. Okay. That makes sense to me. So back to these little guys that are the size of basically a cat, like a big cat, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So they're one of the things, because I know, like, again, what you were mentioning earlier on the mainland, they lived a little bit differently. I know one of the things I read, again, forgive me because I'm reading on the internet and I don't know what's true or not. Obviously, wildcat's probably one of them. Anyways, they really can drink a lot of water, but they can also go without water for a long time too. So I'm confused a little bit about that. Do they normally drink a ton of water? Is that what they normally do if it's available to them?
Yeah, I think that comes from Rottnest Island, where the water, they've got big lakes there, but it's quite saline, and over summer it just virtually doesn't rain at all,
Right.
and so that water becomes dries up and becomes pretty scarce. And that kind of affects their breeding patterns. So they give birth at the end of summer, and so the young is suckling with their mum. Oh, sorry, they give birth at the end of winter, so the young is suckling with their mum. No, that's. Can we do that again? They give birth at the end of summer.
Your winter is my summer, by the way.
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So you said it right both times.
They give birth at the end of summer so that the young are suckling their mum during winter when it's rainy and there's lots of water around and the food's good. But in summer, they starve to death because there's not enough water. So because they need water to process the vegetation that they're eating, if there's not enough water around, they won't be able to process that vegetation, so they'll actually starve to death, not die from lack of water. So, that's the constraint that water places upon them.
Well, I also read, again, forewarning, internet, that they also get some of the water actually from the vegetarian that's in the plants and that as well.
Yeah, that'd be true for sure. There's
Yeah.
there's quite succulent plants over there. They spend a lot of time. They've got quite a diverse diet, but there's certainly some species that they prefer to eat. And certainly on the mainland, after fires, that vegetation resprouts pretty quickly. So they're never really short of food. And on the mainland, they live in these upper reaches of little creek systems, waterways. And so they're very close to water at any one time on the mainland, whereas the islands is quite different.
The other thing that I thought was really cool when you're talking about them starving now, and I'm wondering, and it's a question that came up, but if they can't find food, they process the fat from their tail.
Yeah.
And how does that work? And is that also any kind of big-footed marsupial like a kangaroo and that as well? Do they store fat in their tails as well?
Well, I'm not sure the full gamut of what species actually store fat. They call it caudal fat,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly macropods do. And the indigenous people in Australia love a kangaroo tail, roasted kangaroo tail, and it tastes beautiful. But it can be quite fatty at times too.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of marsupials do that. So we've got a species called the fat-tailed dunnart, which it looks like a mouse, but it's carnivorous or insectivorous, and so it eats insects and other small mammals.
Right.
But when it's in really good condition, the base of its tail will be about as thick as your little finger. But when it's in bad condition, it'll be 2 millimeters wide. So
Wow.
It really stores a truckload of fat in that area, and that I guess got us thinking about whether macropods do the same kind of thing, and certainly quokka in good condition show a much fatter tail than when they're a bit hungry or not.
So and I'm sure but how do they get the fat out of the tail? Is the body just secretes into your body and it's just giving you nutrients? Is that what it's doing?
I guess it's the same way. We get fat out of my big gut. If I did a bit of exercise and didn't eat as much, the fat would be transformed to energy, converted to energy, and we'd use that instead of the carbohydrates that we're eating.
So that's why you're the expert and I'm the guy that reads the internet. That's what it is.
Not that I'm doing that at the moment.
For real, 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 for real.
And we'll be right back. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at PrepVet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
Rottnest is a big tourist area, that island for you guys, right?
Yeah, people in Western Australia go over there all the time, and young people and rugby teams get drunk every now and again and play a game called Quokka Soccer, which involves kicking the Quokkas and then getting the media involved, and people get in trouble all the time doing it. Well, historically, they used to get in trouble all the time doing it. Maybe they don't do that so much anymore.
Well, I don't know anything about rugby, so I kind of want to talk about it. Anyways, but what I thought was really cool, and of course, we're bouncing, but over on Rottnest, they almost are kind of a pest. They'll come walking into restaurants and things, because they're really friendly and they're not really afraid of people, which I think is even better from when you see their pictures.
Well, it's kind of payback too from the Quokka Soccer. So Quokkas around the tourist area. So on the eastern side of the island, there's a big a bay where the ferry comes in and lots of tourist accommodation. And people often leave their doors open. So the Quokkas come in and fossick through their food and steal what they want. And then people probably get annoyed with that and kick them out. But Quokkas have got about 7 different types of salmonella. And so when they defecate around the food and people touch it,
oh, that's right,
they pass on these stomach bugs to people and probably return the favor that people have delivered to them as they kick them out.
Well, the crazy thing is, too, is what I read, too, is that, and I'm sure this is true, you're not supposed to feed them because it's not good for them. And 2 is you're not supposed to touch them. There's big fines for it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's pretty common. Yeah, you shouldn't feed any of those animals because they become kind of habituated and rely on the food. And if you're not there, then they might starve to death. But, they also carry disease and can scratch people and things like that. So probably always best not to do that.
Well, of course, you can tell how scientific I am. One of my favorite pictures that I saw when I was, doing the research on it, this guy sitting in a pub and he's got a low bench. He's got a pint on this chair. And the Quokkas standing up looking at his pint. I go, those are my kind of guys. Well, again, digressing all over the place. So let's get back to him. So where is it? One of the things I know we talk about the fox and the cat, but there's a place where one of the other places are snakes they're also one of the predators for them. Is that true?
So in the southwest of WA, because of this natural poison that occurs in the vegetation,
mm-hmm.
the state government conducted a project called Western Shield, where they flew large areas of the state and dropped out poison meat baits to kill out the foxes and cats.
Okay.
Around the Quokka swamps, they drive and drop the baits all the way around the swamps. The reduction in foxes and cats led to an increase in snakes.
Typical.
Yeah, so we call it mesopredator release. And these
right.
kind of mesopredators increased in abundance and then increased in impact on some of the threatened species. So certainly some Quokkas have died because of that. I wouldn't say it's a major threat, but mesopredator release was linked to the reduction in abundance of the woylie, which is an even smaller macropod or wallaby than the quokka.
Wow. It happens all over the place. I did an episode with a group that does a lot of spay and neuter down in Mexico, and then they had a village that they did a great program of spay and neutering all the dogs. Next thing they know, they've got all these cats, and they hadn't done the cats. They had it because the cats are harder to get.
Yep.
And they had all these wild dogs, and all of a sudden, all the cats started taking over. Same kind of idea.
Yep.
I guess nature, it's going to take over where the easiest place is.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. So let's get back to Quokkas. So, that when the name, the happiest animal in the world, let's talk about that. So, because typical tourist, right? So Let's talk a little bit about that and where that comes from.
So I think that comes from a selfie that Roger Federer took with the quokka, and the quokka appeared to be smiling. But in my experience, I've never seen a quokka smile.
No, they don't smile. That's the funny part. Well, when you read about it, they say it's the nature of the way they're structured, right? And now there's literally a term for all you guys out to take selfies. There's called a Quokkas selfie, and all these celebrities, are coming over or going finding them and taking pictures with them, all kinds of them.
Yeah, so I read a story once, and I put it in the kind of the start of my thesis about a guy who went to Rottnest Island, and the book was about animal experiences.
Right.
And this guy went to Rottnest Island. He was sat down. He was cycling around the island, and he sat down in the middle of nowhere, and he started eating his gorgonzola on biscuits, and a quokka came up. And so he thought, the quokka looks hungry. So he handed him a bit of the cheese, and the quokka ate it. And then the quokka fell down, like keeled over. He thought, oh, no, I've killed it. So I better go and take it to the ranger to fix it. So he put it in his backpack, put his backpack on his back, and then cycled as fast as he could to the ranger station. And as he was going around a steep bend, the quokka woke up and bit him on the ear. And so he fell off his bike and landed in the ocean. And the quokka kind of struggled out and swam into the beach, and then kind of stared at him from the side of the beach as he was struggling to get his bike out as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't say they're the friendliest animals.
Yeah, well, they said that they're not afraid of, well, again, internet, but they said that they're not afraid of people. They'll come up, and they say if you want to get a picture with them, don't chase them, hang out, because they're curious apparently, and they want to just check you out for the most part.
Yeah, definitely. I was doing some telemetry at about 3:00 in the morning on the mainland, and there were peak hunters had been through earlier, and so I was a bit nervous that some people will be around, and I had the telemetry going beep, 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 and I could hear it getting stronger. And so every time I turn it off, I could hear footsteps coming closer to me. And mostly quokkas always restrict themselves to the thick vegetation of the swamps, but I was about 50 meters outside the swamp, and these steps were getting closer and closer and I was getting terrified. And then finally, this little quokka poked its head round from behind a shrub, and I was relaxed again. It was all right. But it was just inquisitive, just looking at me, who was making this funny beeping sound up in the forest.
Okay, so we talked about this, but now that I've done more research on it, because one of the things that's out there, I had read something about how the quokkas, if they're being chased by, and I'm going to say how most people read it, and then we can debunk this a little bit.
Yep.
So basically, when they're being chased by a predator, if they have by the way, are all marsupial babies called joeys?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So a baby joey is in there, and what they'll do is, and actually a couple of things, it comes out of their pouch and goes on the ground, and the baby will start making weird sounds, and the mother will run away, and it'll attract the predator towards the baby because they start squealing because they're out of the pouch. Now, I thought it was hilarious, personally. These beautiful, cute things were mean little guys, but that's really not the case, even though at some level they are, in my opinion. But can you talk about that? Because I read it, and I think some of it's just, the science behind it's really fascinating.
Yeah, well, Peter Banks at Sydney Uni was the first one really to describe this, and he was looking at grey kangaroos, and because the marsupial pouch or the macropod pouch is really muscular, so the female can tighten it up and hold it, so you can really have to pull hard to open it up.
Right.
And obviously that's to keep the large joeys inside the pouch. But they can also relax that muscle, and so the joeys just fall out.
Right.
And so when grey kangaroos were being chased by foxes, they just drop the pouch young or the joey and then run away. And quokkas do the same thing. And we assume that's because the adult female knows that she can breed, and so she's kind of a safe bet from an evolutionary sense, whereas the joey, we don't know. There might be something wrong with this reproductive system that makes unable to breed.
Right.
And so this is kind of the obvious evolutionary response. If you can save yourself at the cost of your youngster, if you're not sure how your youngster's going to go, then in a wild animal, that makes perfect sense. Obviously in humans, probably less so. But that's a pretty common response, I think, for a lot of the herbivore species that are marsupials in Australia.
Right. So first of all, and there's something else I want to add to that, but how big are they when they go into the pouch? Because I know, like the Tasmanian devil, when they first go in, they're like the size of a piece of rice.
Yeah, little peanuts.
Yeah.
Joeys are like peanuts, and they're they're tiny. There's no fur on them. They're little pink jelly bean kind of things.
Yeah.
And they've just got forearms, and the forearms kind of grapple their way up through the fur. They smell out the pouch, and they go towards the smell of the pouch.
Right.
And they climb in. So it's probably a journey of, on a quokka, maybe 6 inches, 7, 8 inches. And on from a bigger kangaroo, it could be double that size, that distance.
Right.
And yeah, they climb over it, then they attach to the nipple. And once they're attached to the nipple, they're pretty much fused for a long period of time.
It's same thing with Tasmanian devils. Did the same thing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the Tassie devils and they're part of the kind of Dasyuridae, a different family, but the carnivorous marsupials. And some of the smaller ones have these tiny little jelly beans and their pouches are so rudimentary that it's really just a fold of skin. And so they kind of run along, and sticks and leaves and things bang onto the youngsters as they're attached to the belly of their mum. So it's a much less protected environment that they have to live in.
So one of the things I read, and they said that if they were to lose one of the joeys, that they also have in their wound babies that are in suspension that can come out of the wound right away after that. Is that real? And how long does that last?
Yeah, we call that embryonic diapause.
Okay.
And most of the macropods have it. And it reflects the variation in the Australian environment. So if a wallaby or a kangaroo is in an environment where it doesn't rain for a long period of time, which is pretty typical in Australia, they can hold on to the egg will be fertilized, but they'll hold on to that little joey inside the mother's womb, and then just wait until the conditions are good for several months or so. And then when the conditions are good again, then the growth of that youngster will continue, and she'll give birth, and nothing will be, everything will progress as normal. But when conditions are good, there won't be that diapause at all. They'll just keep breeding.
Several months. That's wild.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing.
So science always fascinates me. So the other thing is too, so once they're in the pouch, and let's say it's a healthy one, and they're not saying, get out of here, that guy's going to eat me, they'll eat you. They're in the pouch for 6 months, right?
Yep.
And then when they get out, they're still with the mom for another couple months on the teat getting milk and things like that, and then they're off to their own.
Yeah, so there's a few stages in that pouch life. So for the initial 3 months or so, they're fully attached to the nipple, and the milk with each nipple changes. So the quokka or the macropod will have one joey, tiny little pinky attached to a nipple. Then there'll be another one out of the pouch that's sticking its head in, taking a drink from the mum's nipple. And the two milks of those two joeys will be completely different to reflect the different growth stages that they're at. But yeah, so as the joey grows, it'll start growing fur, and when it gets furry enough and hairy enough, it'll start leaving the pouch or start sticking its head out of the pouch to see what the world around it is like. And then it'll start leaving the pouch, and every time it gets scared, it'll jump back in, and the mum will, when there's an alarm call, the mum will thump its feet on the ground, and the joey will come jumping back in and dive headlong into the pouch, and then rotate its head round till its head's poking out. And then ultimately it spends more and more time out of the pouch, just putting its head back into suckle until they're kind of independent, or the mum kicks it away and doesn't let it come back and suckle anymore.
Well, that was the question I was going to ask, because when I was reading about it, they said they typically only have one, and the one that they keep that hopefully is healthy, but they can have 2 a year. So that would make sense. So after like 6 months, when that one's getting ready out and the other one's on the other teat with a different kind of milk in it.
Yep.
Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah.
And they have about 17 in a lifespan.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So they've got the potential to really increase in number really quickly.
Yeah.
But what we found on the mainland was that increase hadn't really happened. And so we assumed that was because foxes were killing the youngsters or just keeping that population size down quite low.
Uh-huh. Well, weren't you involved with some kind of study about that? I know you did it on some other animals. So did you do another one on quokkas as well?
Yeah. So we kind of predicted what the population should be if there was no offtake from predators, and found that it was a fraction of that size. So yeah, it seemed like foxes and cats were reducing the numbers. But I guess heartening for the species, people have done research since I finished and have found the population has actually increased. So the continuation of fox control has led to an increase in the abundance of quokkas, And so they're still listed as threatened and vulnerable.
Right.
But the numbers at the sites that I used to monitor have increased, and the number of sites that we know about have increased as well. So things are looking up, I guess, for the quokka.
So on the numbers, because they have the two islands in the mainland, and I, doing the math in my head as we're talking right now, somewhere around 20,000 or something like that. Is that about right?
Yeah, we really don't know. So I looked at the kind of what's called the Northern Jarrah Forest population, which is about the top half of its distribution on the mainland, and we estimated there was about 250 to 300 on that section of the mainland. The southern section might have double that, say 700, and then Bald Island was thought to have about 400, and Rottnest Island has never had a decent population estimate, but numbers vary between 5,000 and 15,000. So it could be anywhere between 6,000 and 20,000, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. I mean, so for you guys that are listening, you've got to look at the images on this thing, and of course, look at social media. But they're the cutest little things in the world, except they're little buggers.
I've got scratches all over my arms to reflect.
That's so funny.
How much they didn't like me, catching them and measuring them and putting radio collars on them.
Well, I want to get into some other stuff now. Is there anything else we should talk about that we missed on them?
No, that's pretty comprehensive, I reckon.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about some of the other stuff you've done. And I do want to get to the book. But a lot of your study is on conservation, and and they're included in this as well, because any species you talk to today, one of the problems are humans, because we're growing and taking over areas, their habitat areas, and all that, climate change and all that. Can we, instead of getting into specific animals, and let's do when we get to some of the things you've done in South Africa and that, but let's talk about what's really affecting them based on your knowledge and your studying and your expertise.
So Australia is different from the rest of the world, as I'm sure you're aware. But with regard to
the people down there.
With regard to threatened species, we're different as well. So around most of the world, most species are threatened by loss of habitat, and that's mostly associated with humans expanding, the things that we do.
Right.
But in Australia, the biggest threat particularly to our mammals, but also to our birds, is introduced species. So foxes and cats and goats and rabbits and introduced rats and mice and disease. And so all these introduced challenges are really affecting our marsupials. So we kind of stand out as quite different there. But broadly, I think the vast majority of Australian mammals are threatened by foxes and cats and goats and rabbits and things like that. But more broadly, I guess the struggles of people in Africa of interacting with large, dangerous animals means that you kind of need to keep them separated. And so if your family's likely to be killed by an elephant or a lion, then you want to make sure that there's not too many of them around your house. And so there's that kind of loss of habitat, but also persecution that goes alongside people living and moving out into those lovely natural environments where biodiversity likes to live. And that's becoming more and more of a threat too. But I guess, humans, the expanding human population is the challenge. And I guess the way I see it is we've probably got about 80 years or so where biodiversity is really going to be under the pump. And after that, human populations are projected to come down. Humans are also projected to become increasingly urbanized. So we're going to have less and less of us living out in the areas where they might interact with wildlife. And we're going to become less resource intensive users of resources. So the next 100 years or so are going to be the real challenge. And after that, I think biodiversity is going to look all right. We just got to get it through that 100-year period.
Well, one of the things that you did, and I think it was you were studying the lions, and they were talking about how big of a space they had, and it was big. And I think what you said, doesn't make me sound like I actually know what I'm talking about, is it's based on the density of the prey.
Yeah, that's right. So for lions, when I moved it over to South Africa and I worked in this national park that was only 13,000 hectares. And when I first got there, the park manager was really scared that they reintroduced 6 lions. And so he was worried that they'd straight away breed and then they'd be killing all his wildlife. And within South Africa, all the national parks are fenced. So there was a big kind of 3-meter high fence around the outside of the national park that was able to keep elephants inside, except for one that got out and ran into a train. But this was able to keep the lions in as well. And so it was a closed area. So the lions couldn't move out to another area or disperse. So they really were constrained in that area. So he asked me how many lions they could sustain. So I looked at all the other parks around Africa that had lion population estimates and worked out what lions preferred to eat and related the abundance of their preferred prey with lion density across Africa, and then made some predictions for Addo. We kind of predicted that they could sustain about 13 lions in the park that we're working in. And we tested those predictions on a few other parks. And when our predictions were exceeded, the populations of the key herbivores like wildebeest or zebra really plummeted quickly. And so we're pretty confident that our predictions are pretty accurate. And so the park managers then, when the lion population reached that number, they started moving them to other sections of the park, first of all, and then other parks in the region. So the lions of Addo were able to found these additional populations throughout the South or the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. But also the park managers in South Africa have such a great knowledge of their species that they were able to slow that initial rate of population increase down. So they created 2 separate prides of lions with 2 males and 1 female in each. And what they wanted to do was have them roaring and fighting and conducting infanticide, which is a pretty common feature of lion behavior, where the males will go out and kill the offspring of a female that they didn't mate with to bring the female back into estrus and then allow them the opportunity to breed with them and pass on their genes. So it's a pretty common feature that lions do, and that worked for a couple of years. The lions didn't breed for didn't successfully breed for about 2 years. And the park managers also introduced spotted hyenas at the same time, and spotted hyenas and lions don't get on particularly well. And so that may also have contributed to the loss of at least 2 litters of cubs that we knew about.
That's crazy. One of the other things you did too, that especially what's going on here right now in the U.S. with our park systems, is how the political ideology can really affect conservation outcomes.
Yeah. And I think the thing I took most heart out of that paper was that there's not left or right doesn't matter so much.
Right. Yeah. It's not about that. I get that.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's right. So, but because across the full suite of kind of political views, the vast majority of people value the environment and value biodiversity.
Right.
But it's all about the marketing of that. So if you're targeting an audience that is more right leaning, then you want to talk about the importance of this for your national character. This species for your national character is
right.
One of our iconic species in the US. Bald eagles are iconic in that regard, and so you can use that as a way of promoting the conservation of biodiversity. Whereas in other places that are more left leaning, you might want to argue that it's the right of the animal to live, and so you don't want to be harming the right of the animal. So it's
how you write the script.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about marketing, I reckon.
Yeah, that's crazy. So let's talk about your book. Let's get into your book. Talk about it.
Yeah, fantastic. So, it's just come out with Taylor Francis it's called Saving Biodiversity. And it just, I guess, looks at the way I learn. I'm a pretty slow learner. And so I tend to have to see things to understand them. And so I go through the different threats that are affecting biodiversity and give some anecdotes about how I learned about that particular threat. And then I go through how conservation scientists and managers are working to address those threats and give some examples of how I learnt about those kind of management actions. Then I look at the successful conservation actions from a variety of places. So I talk about how white rhinos were successfully saved from extinction in South Africa through the good successful breeding and the private ownership of wildlife, and then the moving the rhinos translocation out to a range of other sites. I look at the European bison that was almost extinct after the First World War. The retreating German soldiers pretty much shot them out, but then they were brought into captivity by a German zookeeper, and then they were bred up and then put back into Białowieża primeval forest in Poland. And the numbers have gone from about 8 individuals, and they're now over 5,000 around the world. So it was a real great success story. And a few other sites. I worked in a place in Australia where we've reintroduced 7 species that were previously regionally extinct. So inside this large fenced area. It's about 8,000 hectares where there's no foxes, cats, goats or rabbits. And it's just amazing. It's like Australia would have been like before Europeans arrived. So you can walk through that area at night, shining a spotlight around, and there's eyes everywhere and there's little hoppy things bouncing around all over the place. And it's just amazing. And then I'll finish off with kind of talking about the bigger picture issues that I think we need to do to avert the biodiversity crisis and make sure that our kids and our grandkids are going to see the same amount of amazing biodiversity that we've been lucky enough to see in our lifetimes.
So in the book, you're showing what the problem is and then what the solution is.
Yep.
And so there's the possibility to do that. I mean, with everything that we're going through a pretty crazy time politically here right now, and it's so obviously it's all about chaos. I think more than anything else. And, I mean, I wake up. My life is chaotic to begin with, but when you start reading about all this crazy stuff that's going on, especially with our national parks, that's the thing that concerns me.
Yeah, me too. And I guess COVID really emphasised in Australia how important having access to these green spaces was, and the people that were able to just leave the house. Australia was pretty constrained. We were restricted for a couple of months to within 5 kilometres of our homes. But I'm lucky enough to live in a place where there's national parks all around me. So COVID was just sensational for me. I just went bushwalking every day and kids saw lots of birds and animals. It was just fantastic. But people that were stuck in city areas with no parks really had a tough time.
So are you familiar with I think it's the son of the Sultan from India or somewhere that's trying to clone I think it's a rhino, right? Are you familiar with that?
Oh, I'm not familiar with that one. There's certainly people are trying to clone mammoths.
Right. Or maybe, no, I think it is a mammoth. I'm sorry. I think it's the same guy.
Yeah. Well, down here, they're trying to clone the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. So, yeah, it's kind of amazing technology that they're doing.
Now, I've read something about the tiger. I think that, wasn't there a sighting fairly recently or something?
Oh, there's always sightings.
Yeah, well, it's our guy too.
There's always sightings of panthers and things like that too around Australia. So I don't know. People like a drink.
Well, yeah, you got the Loch Ness monster and everything else too. So there. So, okay, cool. So tell everybody the name of your book and how they can find it and that, and also, and we'll talk about it afterwards. But tell everybody how to find you, how to find out about the book, and all that.
So the book is available on all good bookstores, online on Amazon and Google Books. And you can find me. I work at the University of Newcastle. And yeah.
That's in Australia for those people that don't know. It's not the beer.
That's right.
So University of Newcastle. And I'm going to have a bunch of links on there too. And so when is the book going to be out? What did you say? I know you said soon.
The book came out 2 weeks ago. So it's available now. So
it's out 2 weeks ago. Cool. That's great. Okay, now we're my favorite part. Actually, it's not, but my favorite part, because you're telling the joke now. And for you guys listening, as you all know, so don't start cringing. Actually, Matt's going to tell the joke today. Thank God. And we'll go for it and let's see it. So you've got a joke. So what's your joke?
What's a Quokka's favorite drink?
What is a Quokka's favorite drink?
Koala.
Koala, Coca-Cola. I love it. Thank God you're telling it. And for everybody else out there that's listening, as I always say, your grandkids, your kids, you want to tell a joke, please send me an email. I promise you I'll put you on, because I know Matt didn't want to have to tell the joke, and I know for a fact I didn't want to have to tell the joke. But if you can do that and send me an email at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com, that'd be great. Also, if you've got a great idea for the podcast, I promise you I'll get back to you. Lastly, Matt, thanks so much for being on the show. I mean, you and I could talk for a long time, and one of these days, either you're going to come up over or I'll come down under, and we'll have a pint together and really talk about all these great things. I really, really appreciate it.
Sounds awesome, Mark. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. And then for everybody that's listening, as I always say, you're the guys that make this work for me. Keep listening, following, telling people about the shows. But most importantly, from the bottom of my heart, thanks for listening. For real.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.